Now we'll start.
Oh, I am sorry that you're poorly, but thank you for coming down to my surprise end of chemo party.
That was great.
That
And
was
we smashed it with the hiding and
yeah,
leaping
I
out
really
as a
didn't see
surprise.
you at the window when I walked past.
Nope. We dutifully slumped down in our seats.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you. Really appreciated that.
Well, we appreciate you finishing your chemo.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah. Thank God.
Me too.
I've
Right.
got an update.
What's your update?
Well, my update is about our Kendrick Johnson episode. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to Colleen, because she, although initially when I saw her comment, I thought, brilliant, that's nice. Yeah. And it kind of upset me a little bit. And I thought, okay, regroup. But she's been great, actually. She sent us a really detailed email, and she was like, I understand there's a lot of controversy about this case. There's a lot of information coming from like all different sources. So it is super confusing, but she's sent us so much information and it's so good.
We'll do an update on the case. We'll do an update episode on the case because there's a lot of new information.
I need to give it full attention. I need to properly read through all the information that Colleen has sent us. And I just don't have the time to give it my full attention at the moment. So I will be doing another episode on Kendrick Johnson when I have got a head full of all this other information, because there was a lot in there that I thought, well, that could possibly sway it from that side, and that would make people think that, you know, it was a murder, or, you know, it would make people think it was an accident or whatever. So, yeah.
Well, that's why it's such a perplexing case and why you covered it in the first place, because there is so much conflicting information and there is so much that points to the fact that it was a murder, and there is so much that points to the fact that it was a tragic accident.
Yeah, exactly. And we've heard from so many people that have said, initially, I thought it was an accident. I thought it was
murder.
A murder as well. And then I started sort of researching it and looking into it, and I thought, wait a minute, that doesn't match up. And we've heard from people that have felt like I did in the episode, you know, where they thought it was initially an accident and then thought, that's suspicious.
There is a lot of suspicion as well, isn't there?
Yeah, so thank you, Colleen. I really, if you're still listening, I super appreciate all the information that you've sent me, and I will absolutely be reading through that.
Yeah, that's exactly what we asked for. So although initially we don't want negative feedback, but if you've got a point to the case, you know, we try our hardest to make sure that we cover as much as we can in the cases. And yes, sometimes we might get information wrong, but that's come from a source. We don't make up information. We get all information from valid sources. So if you've got information that is
from what we feel are valid sources. But yeah, I mean, you don't know, you know, like Colleen said in the email, she was like, there's information everywhere about this case, so it's really difficult to pick out what's true and what isn't. But we consider ourselves investigators. No, we don't. But we're perplexed by it. We want the truth as well. Yeah, so it looks like we're all going to go on this journey together. So yeah, if you've got any information or views or opinions or whatever it is, please let me know, because I am going to be looking into it more. And we will do another episode when we're better informed. That's it from me. Morning.
Morning.
My voice went then.
Morning. Oh, you're so poorly.
Oh, sorry, I'm not well. Random blams, go.
No, we did suggest. So when I had my end of chemo party and we was at a whole my family were there, and Josie's family were there, and we was like, should we do a random blam? Just go around the table and be like, random blam, go. But a lot of our family don't listen to the podcast, so they had no idea.
Well, there was a lot of people there that do, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because they were like, oh, we know who you are. And I thought, oh, it's me. But everyone was stuffing their faces too much to do random blams.
Yeah, it was a great little afternoon tea, wasn't it?
It was lovely. And we had things that we've never had before. Sarah tried new things. Sarah did a tequila shot.
Oh my gosh, I got so peer pressured into a tequila shot, didn't I?
I was fighting your corner at the bar as well.
Do it. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never had a tequila shot before.
I know, you caved well quick though.
Yeah, I loved it.
Get it down, you girl.
Yeah, I'm not an avid drinker anyways, so to not have to drink throughout my chemo wasn't really an issue.
No.
But now that I can drink again,
you will.
I was quite lovingly bought a shot of tequila. Yeah. I didn't understand what the salt was for. I didn't understand what the lemon was for, because it did nothing to dissuade the taste of the tequila.
No, I think it's just to make the whole experience more unpleasant.
I think that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think that's the purpose.
Right, my random blam is relevant to the case at hand. So my random blam, and I didn't know this, and I found this very interesting, is that many cult members don't believe in religion. So you generally think that cults are religion based, and that they're all about and they're all about this. But actually, a lot of cult members have kind of tried religion, and they've tried going down those different routes, and it hasn't fit with them. So the cult that I'm discussing today was exactly the same. That's what made it so fascinating. When I was reading through, it's nothing about religion at all.
Yeah, you would imagine people to be religious, like, you know, taking them to a better land or a better place, or. But I've always thought it was religious based.
But it's not religious based in that they follow a specific religion like Christianity or Hinduism. Buddhism. No. You know, it's not a religion based on. It's not a following based on a particular religion.
No.
So I found that interesting.
It is.
Do you have a random blam?
Related to it, I have Kool-Aid in the cupboard. There you go. Okay.
Well, it wasn't Kool-Aid.
It wasn't.
It was not. No. It was a cheaper brand called Flavor-Aid.
Flavor-Aid.
There you go. Random blam. Because there's actually a and I think a lot of the American listeners will know this. There's a saying in America. There's something about drinking the Kool-Aid, and that's if you follow. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. But actually, it wasn't Kool-Aid that they drank.
It wasn't.
It was Flavor-Aid.
But I have Kool-Aid in the cupboard, and it's grape. That's it.
Random blam. Done. May 13th, 1931, Lynetta Jones was given birth when a vision of her long-dead mother came to her and prophesied that her unborn baby would grow up to be a great man. This belief in her unborn son led to the rise of one of the most notorious cult leaders in history and the death of over 900 people.
How very much I've loved you. How very much I've tried my best to give you a good life. But in spite of all of that I've tried, a handful of our people with their lives have made our life impossible. There's no way to detach ourselves from what's happened today. Not only we're in a compound situation, not only are there those who have left and committed the betrayal of the century. Some have stolen children from others and then pursuit right now to kill them because they stole their children. And we are sitting here waiting on a powder keg. I don't think this is what we want to do with our babies. I don't think that's what we had in mind to do with our babies. It was said by the greatest of prophets from time immemorial, no man takes my life from me, I lay my life down.
So today, I'm going to tell you the story of the Jonestown Massacre. Born in a small town in Indiana, James Jim Jones described his childhood as one that was filled with neglect and poverty. In 1934, in the midst of the Great Depression, the Jones family was evicted from their home for failure to make mortgage payments. Their relatives actually purchased a shack for them to live in nearby, in the town of Lynn. And the new home where Jones grew up, it lacked plumbing and electricity, and they often had no money for food, and they would forage in the surrounding forest for food. And Jones said that he would sleep on just like a rotten old mattress with the ceiling above all caved in and it dripping water. And so he described himself as a very poverty-stricken child. His father had been captured in the war previously, and he'd suffered lasting effects from inhaling mustard gas.
Oh.
So he'd been left with damage to his lungs. So he was often very, very weak and was unable to work. So his mother, Lynetta, she was a very strong-willed woman, and she spent pretty much all of her time and energy working endless jobs to support the family. So this left little Jim alone for the majority of his younger years, and an older neighbor often took pity on him, and she said that she noticed that the family didn't go to church, and she didn't think that it was right that a boy of Jim's age, I think he was about 7 or 8 at the time, that he didn't go to church. So she often took him with her to the local Pentecostal church, and it was there that Jim said that he finally felt accepted and he felt welcomed and he felt like he had a family. So around age 10, Jim began a quest for seeking out different churches in the area. So he would go by himself to all the different churches, and he quickly learned, and he began taking in all the differences that there was between all of these churches, and he learned how to preach to people. He was described by the neighborhood kids as strange and weird because Jim had an obsession with religion and death. He would preach to his classmates, and he would take the neighbor children into the family's barn and hold ceremonies to preach to them the ways that of the church. And he would only let them go when the service was over. So he would kind of lock the barn doors and lock them in there.
You will listen to me.
You will listen. In these services, Jim would often claim that he had unique abilities, such as the ability to fly, which he was very happy to demonstrate. He leapt off the roof of the barn, fell, and broke his arm. But despite his failure, his confidence never faltered, and he would vehemently defend his unique abilities. He knew that he was special, and he just believed in himself so much. I don't know whether he believed in himself or whether he believed that he could convince other people. I don't know what it was, but throughout his entire life, he believed he had something that other people didn't. He would also hold funerals for dead animals. And one of the neighborhood kids said that he actually believed Jim was going out and killing these animals just so that he could hold funerals for them. So he would go also and pick up like roadkill and then have a funeral for it. And he would invite the neighborhood children to these services. And even if nobody else attended, Jim would still have this service for this dead animal. And I keep saying the term neighborhood children because friends is a term that doesn't really fit. Jim didn't have friends. They were the neighborhood kids. Jim was wildly unpopular. His fellow classmates found his overpowering zest for religion strange. He didn't fit in with what they was doing as children. They didn't partake in any of that. They might have gone to church on Sundays, but it wasn't all consuming. And Jim didn't take part in things that all the other kids did. So he felt that it was sinful to dance with other children or to be singing and things. So he didn't take part in anything that the other children were doing. Jones instead would spend hours at the community library. He was an avid reader and he studied different political systems, which as a kind of teen around this time.
I was going to say, how old was he?
Yeah, kind of into his teens. Yeah, probably about 11 maybe, because it was at the start of the Second World War.
Okay.
And he became obsessed with certain figures of authority, so almost dictators, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, Mahatma Gandhi, and then especially Adolf Hitler.
Right.
So all of the kids in the neighborhood, when the Second World War started, they started playing armies, and they were the Americans. They were the Americans defeating the Germans. And Jim, however, turned that into, he was going to be the dictator. He was going to be the dictator that instructed all of these children what to do. And he would gather them up and then sort of preach to them and order them around. And he would order them to goose step around, like around the barn or around the area. And a goose stepping, if people don't know, is a military march. So he'd order them to do this military march. And if people said no, or if people didn't do it how Jim wanted it done, he would dish out punishments to those children.
Goodness.
And one of the children actually said that Jim had been, at the end of the war, Jim had been especially impressed with Hitler's decision to commit suicide in order to evade capture. He was very impressed by that decision. So from Jim's own account, he said that by the 3rd grade, he was ready to kill. And this is a direct quote from Jim himself. And he says, "I was ready to kill by the end of the 3rd grade. I mean, I was so aggressive and hostile. I was ready to kill. Nobody gave me love, any understanding." So Jim describes himself as an outsider, like an outcast. And he said that based on how the people of the neighborhood treated him, he felt like an outsider. But I think it was for the reasons that I've already mentioned that he was treated that way. He wasn't born into being an outsider. He kind of outcast himself by his behavior. Parents in the neighborhood forbade their children to play with Jim. And by the start of high school, he was pretty much despised by all the local residents.
Oh dear.
In high school, Jim made it a point to stand out from his peers. I said he's got this quality in him that he believed he was better than everybody else. So he thought he was above them. He would carry a Bible with him everywhere. He would wear his best Sunday church clothes every day to high school. And he would often debate topics with teachers. So he would just get into debates with them. He was very, very, very smart. He was very well read. And if teachers said something to him, he often started a debate because that's what he was good at. And he also had a bad habit of, he wouldn't speak in a conversation unless he'd started it. So if one of the high school children come up to him and said, "Hey Jim, blah 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 blah," Jim wouldn't converse because he had not started that conversation.
Very controlling, isn't it?
Very.
Like from a young age. I didn't realise he started being like controlling like that right from a child.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
mad.
Absolutely. And that's why I started the episode, and that Lynetta Jones, his mother, believed that he was going to be a great, powerful man. So I think that influence at an early age, you know, you're going to be somebody, you're going to be better than everybody. Did that have an effect? And did that plant in his mind this seed that he was better than everybody? And then it kind of, I don't know, but
it comes out in your personality when you're someone like that. I think, you know, when you can definitely tell someone that has the mindset of I'm better than you, and it doesn't make for a popular person, does it?
Well, no, like I say, he was very, very unpopular, and he made himself even more unpopular by going to certain events that the other high school children were going to. He would interrupt these social events because he felt that they were sinful, and then he would stand there. You know, you can imagine him at like a house party, interrupted it with his Bible, and he would preach to people. What you're doing is wrong. It shouldn't be this way. And he would insist that they read the Bible. The one thing that Jim had going for him was his passion for integrating people. So in a time where Black people were treated with indifference and they weren't allowed to participate in things, Jim vehemently preached for equality.
Okay.
And he befriended anyone of a different race. And he even set up and coached a children's baseball team to allow for a racially mixed team to play. However, Jim, he was dismissed from his coaching of this baseball team because he'd killed a dog in front of his team by dropping from a window. I don't know what he was trying to prove. So he had the one redeeming factor was this need for equality. Jim's parents divorced in 1945, and himself and his mother Lynetta, they moved to Richmond, where he continued in his high school there, and he eventually graduated with honours in 1948. He also had a job at the Richmond Reed Hospital, where he worked as an orderly. He briefly had an ambition to become a doctor because he wanted to help people. He really wanted to do something to change the world. And all through reading this, I think he sets out with such a great ambition. He sets out to integrate the world, and he wants to make changes, and he wants to do all these good things.
Yeah, but he's also killing dogs, so
yeah. I mean, I didn't say I liked the man.
No.
But yeah, he briefly had an ambition to become a doctor because he wanted to help people, but that didn't last long. He was quite easily swayed back to the churches. But while he was at this hospital, he met Marceline Baldwin, and the pair started a relationship and were eventually married in 1949. From the start, Jim's new wife was the subject of much psychological and emotional abuse. You've said it yourself, he was very controlling. So much so that he would often tell her that a close relative had died. And then he would spend time comforting her and consoling her. And then he'd go, God. Oh, no, actually, that wasn't true.
Well, how did she react to that?
Well,
I mean, surely you'd only have to do that once to like your partner, and they'd be like,
it's almost a pattern, because he does that there, but he also does that to his members of the church. So I think it's a very emotional connection, because he's said that horrible thing, but he's given them so much love, and he's given them so much compassion and caring that those people wanted that. And then he's gone, oh, by the way, I'm lying. But people don't focus on that. They focused on the
Not
good.
really.
Not really jokes. They focused on the good, that great feeling that he's given them.
Yeah.
So it's a very controlling, abusive relationship that he's got with Marceline. And it was in his early 20s that Jim began to express views on communism and other radical political views. He was, like I say, very passionate about anti-racism, and he wanted everybody to be equal. And him and his wife moved from where they were in Richmond, and they moved back to Indianapolis in 1951. And he began to attend Communist Party gatherings. But Jones wanted to start integrating his beliefs into the church. And in 1952, he told his wife that he wanted to become a Methodist church minister. So he had very, very strong communistic beliefs, and he really loved the Pentecostal church, which is a very kind of preachy church. But he thought that he could go into a Methodist church and put his communist beliefs across there. And Jim started working as a student pastor in a Methodist church, and he put into place a plan for a children's play area that would be open to all children or of all different races, because that wasn't a thing. There was no integrated children's play areas or anything there. So he went into this Methodist church and he opened one. But in 1954, he'd been working at this church for a few years. He was dismissed from this church for stealing church funds. But Jim denied that he was stealing church funds, and he said that was a cover-up, and that he'd actually been dismissed for trying to integrate the Black community into the church. But by this time, Jim had started what he called his rainbow family, and him and his wife adopted their first child, who was originally from Native American descent. They then went on to adopt 3 Korean American children. They had 1 biological child together, and then they were also the first white couple in Indiana to adopt a Black child. That was a massive talking point.
Yeah.
And I'll say it again, Jim was extremely passionate about racial integration. And he would go to churches and he would find Black people sitting at the very, very back of the church, or kind of, standing at the doors because they weren't allowed in. And he would take these people and he would take them up to the very front of the church. And at one point, he made a statement to this church, and he got all of the Black people to stand on the stage and listen to the service. So he did all of these views, whether he did it for shock factor and to get his name out there, whether he did it because he genuinely felt that was the right thing to do, I don't know.
I mean, that's far to go, though, isn't it? He was obviously, I don't know. It's like he was obviously wanting to do the right thing, and a good thing,
in the wrong way.
Yeah, adopting these babies, these children.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a great thing to do. I just
but
don't
was it a
understand
public statement?
I don't know. Because that's taking it a bit far, isn't it? Adopting children and things like that, just to make some sort of public statement. Is it going to have that much of a positive outcome? I don't know.
I don't know, but he, in Indianapolis, or Indiana at the time, it was very, very racially segregated. So he moved back there on purpose, and he adopted his rainbow family, and his wife begged him to allow them to move from Indiana because she would get absolutely ridiculed going down the street with her race, with her rainbow family. She would be spat at, and he would refuse to move them because
do you think
he believed that he wasn't,
any attention is good attention kind of thing? Because
perhaps
surely if you're in that kind of place, that's, you know, very racially charged, why would you then kind of go against the grain to think that that's going to bring people to you? Because if anything, that's going to make people think worse of you by the sounds of it.
I think he just wanted to get his name out. Like I say, I do believe that he wanted equality. I think that he perhaps wanted it for the wrong reasons. Right. But after Jim left the Methodist Church, he became fascinated in the healing revival and the latter rain movement, which was formed by the Pentecostal Church. And the latter rain movement, it saw itself as non-denominational, and it sought to bring all other denominations under its umbrella, and then it wanted to reconstitute as a universal church. Right. So you can see where that fitted in with Jim's ideology of equality and almost a communistic lifestyle. So he began preaching at different conventions and different churches under this latter rain movement, and he began his own healing ritual services. Oh. And these healing ritual services were targeted mostly towards African American people, because what he preached was equality, and that's what they wanted. Yeah. So he got people on his side very quickly, and he soon had enough followers to develop his own church. So in October 1955, Wings of Healing was officially established, but would later be renamed. Jim's new church started with around 20 members, and these were people that had followed him from these different healing services or church services, and they believed in what he believed in, so they followed him wherever he went. But 20 members wasn't enough to financially sustain his church. He was renting out a space, and that obviously costed money. And at one point, he went door to door selling monkeys to fund this church. Yeah. And it was, you know, he also had people then, because he would knock on their door. Do you want to buy a monkey? No. Well, listen to this. And he would begin preaching to them. So he did everything that he could to gain followers.
Sorry, that gave me a coughing fit.
Sorry,
do you want to buy a monkey? No. Well, listen to this then. There's something completely unrelated
off topic
to monkeys.
But, you know, he had people there on a one-to-one basis, and he had the door open so they couldn't shut it in his face, because he had one foot in the door.
One monkey in the door.
Monkey. Yeah. Yeah. And then they had people's attention. But what Jim decided to do to gain more followers was to hold a healing revival convention. And he enlisted the help of William Branham. And William Branham was a healing evangelist and a Pentecostal leader in the global healing revival. These are all things I had no idea existed.
No.
Okay. There was a global healing revival. And you can imagine what I mean by a healing revival. But I'll go through it in more detail anyways. Okay. But the convention took place over 4 days, and it was from June the 11th to June the 15th, 1956. And it gathered more than 11,000 people.
Oh my goodness.
And these 11,000 people were absolutely enthralled by Jim with his amazing abilities to remove cancerous tumours, to give sight back to blind people, you know, to enable people to walk that previously had been wheelchair bound. Jim had a supernatural ability to heal people.
Did he?
Or so they thought. After the convention is when the church was renamed. So it went from Wings of Healing, and he renamed it to the People's Temple Full Gospel Church.
Sorry, say that again?
The People's Temple Full Gospel Church.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So he named it the Full Gospel Church because he wanted it to attract African Americans. But it was the People's Temple. You know, that nobody wants to go. You know, when you go to the pub and it's got a really long name, you shorten it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was called People's Temple. And attendees to the church rose from its original 20 members to over 1,000 members per service.
Yes.
And with his new mass following, Jim was named the leader of the local Human Rights Commission, and him and the People's Church, they actually made some great changes in Indiana at the time. They were responsible. This is fact, okay? They were responsible for racially integrating all the local churches, restaurants, the telephone company, the Indianapolis Police Department, a theatre, and an amusement park.
Jeez.
So they've done some great things. They made some real changes.
Yeah,
and
just took a left turn, didn't they?
It went wrong. He would walk through racist neighborhoods and comfort Black people. You know, these Black people had been targeted, so often they were like swastikas that had been painted over their homes, or, you know, they'd been verbally abused and whatever else. So he would go through these neighborhoods and just sit with them and talk to them and take that time and care. And he set up soup kitchens to feed the hungry. He gave out free clothing to people that needed it, and food, groceries, you know, that him and the People's Church done some great things.
I had no idea about all of this.
Oh, I know.
I mean, it's not a surprise to anyone that knows me, you know, that I wouldn't know that, but yeah, that's mad. He did a lot of good stuff.
He done a lot of great things, and this is a quote.
A lot of horrendous stuff.
Yeah. This is a quote straight from the Wikipedia page about Jim Jones, and it says, by the end of 1961, Indianapolis was a far more racially integrated city, and Jim Jones was almost entirely responsible.
Wow.
But please don't be lulled in.
No, I'm not. He's not endearing me.
No. Around this time, though, Jim started to become paranoid of a nuclear attack.
Of course he did.
It was something that was quite often in the media as well. So you can kind of understand that. I think a lot of people feared a nuclear attack, but he feared it most because he felt that it was directed to him. You know, he's this very incredibly special person, and people wanted to eradicate him. And that's how he felt. So he up and he moved his family to Brazil, as it had been named one of the safest places to avoid a nuclear attack. And he left his church and his followers to kind of just run itself. But he used money from the church and his followers to fund his move.
Oh dear.
But while he was out in Brazil, he received word from his followers back in Indianapolis that his services had dropped to less than 100 people per service now. So whether it was for the fear of losing his church members, or the fact that the loss in numbers meant that he could no longer fund his life in Brazil, Jim very quickly moved his family back. In 1965, Jim moved his church and over 100 of his followers to Redwood Valley, near the city of Ukiah in California. And he warned his followers of the impending nuclear attack that would happen. And he sought to move them to a safer place. And that's how he got 100 of his followers to come and live with him at this place in Redwood Valley. You know, it was kind of like a complex, I guess, for all of its followers. But it just so happened that this move coincided with a time that Jim's healing practices were being looked into and questioned. The new church in California was a self-sustaining complex for its followers, and people lived on the community and they worked from sun up to sundown at every job they needed doing. And Jim started healing rituals again to build up his followers. And soon the People's Church was absolutely thriving. He had a whole new audience in California now. So he had a whole new lot of like people to preach to. Yeah. And these new healing rituals were like nothing you've ever seen. There's a video of one of them, and people gather there in their thousands, and they're desperate people. You know, that they're you don't go to a healing ritual unless there's something that you need healing. Yeah. So these people were desperate people, and they were willing to hand over everything that they had to be healed, or, you know, to heal their loved ones. he would show people a bag of like these disgusting cancerous tumors that he'd removed from people, and he would pick people out of the audience. Oftentimes there was an elderly woman in a wheelchair, and he would do this healing on her, and it was this really extravagant, grandiose show of this healing. And she would very slowly get up out of her chair, very, very slowly, and she would take like this unsteady step, like this first step that she's taken in ages. And the crowd were absolutely mind blown, and you can hear him in the video, like absolutely amazed, like how on earth
witnessing a miracle.
So she would take one step, and then slowly she would take another step, and soon she was walking among the crowd, and then she was running among the crowd. Whoa. And people were just absolutely enthralled by his ability to heal. But what they didn't know is that all of these people that were healed were stooges.
Bastards.
They were all members of the People's Temple. They were all healthy individuals. And the bag of cancerous tumours that he'd said that he'd removed from people were actually just like chicken innards. Yeah.
Entrails.
He once drugged a woman until she fell unconscious, and literally fell unconscious, and he bustled her backstage. Nobody knew that she was drugged. She was in the crowd. That someone had handed her a drink. One of the People's Temple members had handed her a drink, and it had something in it. I don't think it was just yet. And she literally fell unconscious, fell over. So everybody bustled her backstage, and they put a cast on her leg, and she was told that she'd broken her leg in the fall. And days later, when she came back to attend the healing ritual again, she was asked to come up on the stage so that she could be healed. And Jim done his miraculous healing. You know, he done this
Heal
show
the
of
broken leg.
Heal all this.
You
Devil be gone.
And
the
power of Christ. No,
is that the wrong thing?
Yeah,
I do apologize. And he took the cast off, and then everyone watched. The woman was like watched in her own amazement as she was then walking about the stage completely pain-free on her now non-broken leg, which wasn't broken to begin with. So you can kind of see how he's manipulating people, and you know, how he's doing these things. And before some of these healing rituals, he would just walk among the crowd, and he would listen to people and stuff. So some people, like, you know, that were wearing glasses, and he would heal them and give them their sight back. To some people that was genuine. To some people, they believed that they'd got their sight back. But it's a psychological phenomenon with the healing revivals, that actually it's the endorphins that are created in that environment. It tricks your mind to believe that that's what's happened. It's almost like a what are those pills that you take that are got nothing in them? What's it called?
Placebos.
A placebo. Yeah, it's almost like a placebo effect. You believe it's going to happen. You believe you've been healed, and you convinced yourself of that. So to some people, it was absolutely genuine.
Wow.
And the People's Temple was still committed to doing great work for the community. They'd moved to California, so now they were doing it there. And Jim had set up homes for the elderly, like an old people's complex almost, where the elderly would go and people would look after their every need. So they had to sign everything over to the People's Temple. And this meant any money that they were getting, social security checks and things like that, all went to the People's Temple. And this elderly people's complex, it relied heavily on the followers to volunteer, with most people spending 20 hours a day volunteering. People quit their jobs. You know, they'd already up and moved their homes, and they quit their jobs to volunteer at these things. And I say volunteer, but that's because they're giving up their time. They were actually paid, but they had to give the money back to the temple.
Yeah.
So they were given a paycheck that they then had to turn over to the People's Temple. And they in order to receive a place to sleep, food, healthcare, everything like that, and then they were given an allowance of $5 each a week.
Goodness.
And it was often a matter of pride among the followers about who worked the most, who'd volunteered the most hours, who had slept the least. It was deemed selfish to put sleep above the work that needed doing at the People's Temple.
Yeah.
The work that they were doing prioritized everything.
A competition for like martyrdom, isn't it? Like who's suffering the most for the cause.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And their cause was a great cause. They were doing some incredible things. And survivors commented that they were so sleep deprived that they couldn't think for themselves, so they allowed Jim to think for them. They believed that Jim knew everything. They trusted Jim, so that they didn't think they had to think for themselves, and they relied on Jim to do that for them because Jim was leading them in the right direction.
Yeah.
And people said that they came to the People's Church because of the people. It was a community that, like I said, they'd sold off their property, their belongings. They handed everything over to Jim or the People's Temple in order for them to be a part of this community. And it was, I want to say, it was like, you know, Sister Act, when they do all the great songs and the, you know, it was such a great environment. When you watch it, you want to be there. It was such a great invite at these services. They were gospel choir services, and they were upbeat, and the members there were so incredibly happy, and it was a giant family.
I think gospel churches are incredible.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it makes you want to.
It just lifts your spirits, doesn't it?
And, you know, I get why people worship, you know, the Lord in a gospel church. Like, I get that. I think, I mean, when I've been to, you know, church services, or, you know, even like weddings and things like that, it's so boring, you know, like as a child, you know, you think, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be.
So dreary, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's someone sort of standing there droning on monotone, you know, blah 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 blah, and that's all you hear as a child or a teenager. But gospel churches look awesome,
and they're so passionate as well. Passionate, and it does. Like I say, when you watch it, you want to be there, and you want to be a part of it, and you want to join in because it just looks 100%. Fantastic. And that's exactly what people wanted, and people wanted to do good. They wanted to do well for their community, and they also wanted to be a part of the People's Temple.
I completely.
But what they didn't realize that Jim was what Jim was doing was controlling them. They didn't realize that by handing over all of their money and their property, they had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
But at the time, they didn't think of that because they didn't want to be anywhere else. But when there came a time for them to be like, I don't want to be part of this anymore, they were tied in.
Yeah.
Jim was pocketing around $20,000 a week from his followers.
Jesus.
And he soon started turning to drugs. So
20 grand a week.
Yeah. So not only, you know, he was getting a lot of money from the government as well for the elderly complex, for every person that they cared for. He was getting a lot of money. He had, like I say, everybody that sold their property handed that money over to Jim. When they were doing the services, it raised a lot of funds for the church, and Jim and his inner circle would fudge the numbers to make it look like they hadn't done well. So he was pocketing all that money. So he had a lot of money coming in, and he went down a bad route.
Yeah.
And if he wasn't paranoid enough about people wanting him dead or the nuclear attacks and things like that, these drugs that he were on made him even more paranoid.
Brilliant.
Jim said that he took these drugs to help him stay awake, so that he could stay awake longer, to do more work, to do more good. But he told his followers that there were people out to assassinate him. And this was at a time where political leaders were being assassinated.
All right.
So it wasn't particularly far-fetched. But Jim felt that he was as important as these political figures, that he would be a target.
He would be a target, yeah.
Absolutely. Jim went so far as to stage different attacks on his life in order to reinforce the loyalty of his followers. So going back to this controlling behaviour that he'd done for his wife, and I said that there was a pattern of it, this is one of them. During a service, people heard gunfire, and when they looked up on stage at Jim, this bright red started like to spread across his chest, and people was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And they fled, churchmen just fled to the stage, and they, you know, Jim had collapsed on the floor, and they carried his little limp body away out of the people's like where the ceremony was being held, and they laid him to rest somewhere, and then they ran off in hysterics back to the service. You know, what do we do? What do we do? Jim's been shot. And they were adamant that he was dead. But 20 minutes later, Jim appeared through the entrance of the church doors in a blood-free white shirt, claiming to have healed the bullet wound. But he insisted on hanging the bloodied shirt in the church as a visual reminder to people about how valuable his life was and how easily it can be taken away. But what no one questioned was the fact that there was no bullet hole in this shirt.
Yeah.
It was just red fake blood on the shirt hanging up. There was no bullet wound hole at all in the shirt. He also started to prophesy that anyone unfaithful to him or that didn't follow his preachings would die. They would die in a fire, or they would die in a car crash. And he started to become aggressive with his services and asking his followers to become aggressive as well. In order to recruit new followers, they needed to be aggressive.
Oh dear.
As the People's Temple started to grow, Jim created an armed security guard to ensure that order among his followers, and to also guarantee his own personal safety. So he had an inner circle. It was Jim and his wife and his children, an inner circle of close people that did. I think there was a lawyer, somebody that did the books, and, you know, a trusted inner circle, and then the armed security guard as well. And it was during this time in California that reports of abuse started to surface. Abuse of children, abuse of his followers, mental, physical, emotional abuse. Jim told all of his members that they were homosexual. He said that all women were lesbians and that all men were gay, and that he was the only heterosexual. He told his members that they needed to abstain from sex, and that sex distracted people from the church, from the good that they were doing in the community. But what no one knew was that Jim didn't live up to his own standards, his own expectations. He was far from abstaining. He was in fact raping men and women of his church.
Oh, Jim.
There was a documentary that I watched, and one of the survivors says that Jim went up to him just really casually. I think he'd come out of somewhere, and Jim went up to him and touched him on the back of the neck and said, do you want me to f you in the
Oh god.
And this guy goes, not
really.
no, I'm all right, thank you. And Jim goes, well, you know, if you ever need that, then I'm here. And
no thanks,
when word got out that had been happening, there was, amongst the followers, I think somebody stood up. I don't think Jim was there, but I think somebody stood up and said, who has been that, and they said this quite openly, who has been f***ed in the by Jim.
Oh god.
And loads of different men's hands were raising, and this guy was like, well, I don't want that. Is this where it's going? I don't want to be involved in that. You know, I've got a wife. I don't want any of this.
Yeah.
But Jim didn't allow people to kind of talk amongst themselves. So nobody else kind of really knew what was going on. They knew what was going on with them, but they didn't know what was going on with other people, and they didn't know how other people felt. But Jim told people that to be fully invested in the church meant that they would have to have sex with him.
Right.
So that would bring them closer to the church's cause. If they were fully invested in the church's cause, then they had to do that. They had to have sex with Jim. He hated it. He didn't want that. He was making a sacrifice for the good of his followers.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that he wanted.
Yeah, I can see that. Poor Jim.
And like I say, people were restricted from communicating with each other. Husband and wives barely had any time together anyways, because they were working so much. They were doing so many hours, volunteering and things, that sometimes they would get 3 or 4 hours of sleep. So they were so brainwashed that they didn't communicate at all. So if people had any thoughts of leaving the church, they just kept it to themselves. People were soon required to spy on each other and hand over anyone not living in the temples up to the temple standards. And people wanted to be close to Jim. Jim said to them, if you do this for me, if you turn over these people, this is, you're in the temple's eyes, you'll be getting higher up the ladder. And, and people wanted that. So they would actively seek out members that had more than 4 hours sleep, because that was selfish, or people that just weren't living up to the way of the people's temple. And friends and family turned on each other. So any thoughts of kind of questioning Jim or going against his church were kept to themselves for fear of being turned over, because if they were turned over, they were punished. And people were given reduced food rations, harsher work schedules, public ridicule, and complete humiliation, and sometimes sort of physical punishments as well.
Yeah, you can see it suddenly like making this huge turn.
Absolutely.
And it's like people kind of realise, but
that it's too late now.
Yeah. They're in it. So,
but it's like a domestic violence relationship in that it's so great at the beginning. And then it turns bad. But so people are holding on to the fact that it was so great at the beginning. Yeah. And they want that back.
Good again. Yeah.
It'll be good again. They want that back. So what if these people were kind of pulled up on stage, and like I said to you at the beginning, I completely forgot. I haven't told everybody else. There are over 900 tapes of different services.
Crazy.
And some of these services include Jim pulling people out of the audience and saying, so-and-so said that you've been doing this. And he would sometimes publicly humiliate them in front of these other church members. And he stripped a woman naked before.
God.
He stripped her naked and got everybody in the audience to comment on a part of her body. They commented on every single part of her body. And one of the members said that not only was her face red, her entire body was red from humiliation. She was just so publicly humiliated. So people didn't want that.
No.
They wanted to do everything by the book so that that didn't happen. Children were punished as well, quite harshly, for misbehaving. There was a 3-year-old that had been made to clean the church floor with a toothbrush for hours on end because he'd misbehaved. And Jim wasn't happy, though, with just his church in California. It wasn't gaining as many members as he wanted, and it wasn't political enough for him in California. He wanted his name to be out there, and he couldn't do that from where he was. So he began opening other churches in different areas. And eventually he moved the People's Temple to San Francisco. And then in San Francisco, things went from bad to worse.
Oh, God.
And that is where I'm going to leave part 1.
Oh, shut your face. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Oh.
Honestly, there is so much to this story that it could quite easily have been a 3-parter. Or if I'd have just done the whole story as it was, it'd be about 4 hours long.
Well, do you know what? There's so much in pretty much 99% of what you've just said that I had no idea about. So that's cool.
It's cool.
I mean, it's not cool what he did, but it's cool.
No, and part two is
hard.
You know, part 1 I've gone through the backstory of Jim. Part 2 is going to be the bit that most people know of Jim.
Okay.
So part 2 is a hard listen, people, but make sure you listen, because
she's not doing it again.
I'm not doing it again. I really, really got so passionate about this story and so in it that I really want to do it justice. It's just such a tragic story. So part 2 will be out the following week.
So if anyone's got any hints or tips on Jonestown, Jim Jones, let Sarah know. Hideous. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, Sarah.
No, you're welcome. See you for part 2.
Yeah, see you for part 2. Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
To say, I'm a ray of sunshine.
You are a ray of fucking sunshine.